I mean, it was just amazing. I felt like Mike does these small penis jokes, right? I felt like a woman, and I said it was like, this is what a dick is, I guess, you know. What is this I got down there? But I didn't want to tell that. It would have been pretty funny. But this is a comic book story, you know. This is a comic book show. Edit all that shit with me and my porn career. But
what was that? I missed it.
maybe we should do it.
Oh, that's the stuff that people want to hear. They don't want to hear about comic books.
They want to hear about.
What do they want to hear about comics?
John Holmes and his 12-inch penis.
Can you say words like bullshit and stuff like that? Or
How about now? Okay, we're in 5, 4.
Can't get the top down.
Whoa! Look who's back, and look who's smiling. You're back on Comic Book Geeks, but you're not going to be smiling for much longer, because we're about to break your hearts. Joshua Dysart here. He's going to tell you all about Africa. And a lot of hungry people in Africa, a lot of bad shit going down. But this is sort of like the unknown war, and he's doing a book called The Unknown Soldier. We'll talk about that later. But right now, let's just take one more moment to revel in our happiness and say we are crazy about comic books.
Comic book geek. I never set limits on what man can achieve, so they call me a comic book geek. I love love and beauty and what philosophers say, but I'm a comic book geek. Don't call me a loser, 'cause I'm a comic book geek. 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 I want to live in a world of adventure. I want to have the seas of immortality. I want to move across the limits of imagine past the limits to believe that we can be beyond the limits of human. That's why they call me a geek. Oh, well, a comic book geek. I love a comic book geek. Well, I'm a comic book geek. Well, I'm a comic book geek. Geek, 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 geek. Well, I'm a comic book geek.
Well, are we filming?
Are we rolling?
Okay, we're back.
I know that in the past, you've gotten pretty irate at people, various stereotypical presentations of comic book readers and collectors and stuff.
Yes.
And film
like
and
the way
TV.
Hollywood portrays.
Precisely, yeah.
Yes.
You don't feel like you're contributing to this in any way with this show.
I think we are raising the bar. I mean, would be one way of putting it. Do you think that you feel like you contribute to?
Well, I mean, he obviously is all class, and that's a whole other.
Yes.
But you, on the other hand, I think maybe you're contributing to stereotypes.
Mike's got a lot of class, but it's all low.
That's good. Maybe it's all a matter of perspective. But yeah, wow, you put me on the spot. Yeah, I don't know.
I just
maybe
thought we'd start with a bang.
It's something to think about, and it's something I will toss and turn and consider every night. And no, I'm not contributing because I actually sleep with a woman at night, and that is what angers me.
But not on the show.
But not on the show. No, on the show I sleep with Captain Greedy. But no, in my
It's a
real
pretty
life,
sight.
I have a real. I mean, she was a girlfriend, now a wife,
and pregnant as well. Like,
well, yeah.
And one assumes it's yours.
Oh
Oh my God!
That's the segue. You went to Africa because you were doing it. You were doing the Unknown Soldier, a DC comic book.
Yeah.
And they sent you there, or you sent yourself there. You
Yeah,
actually
they don't
paid your own
really
way.
care if I did the research
But you
or
did.
not. They could
Did
care
you-
less.
So tell us how long were you there, and tell us the whole story.
Yeah. You all right?
Wait, one second.
Is your cape like messing up
I
my?
made my cape not move while I did
Okay,
that.
my cape not move. I was in Africa for a little over a month, and yeah, it was awesome. I landed in Kampala, which is on the western side of Uganda, and then I followed the DRC border up to the Sudan border, which is Acholi land, which is where a 20-year-long war has been waged between the Lord's Resistance Army and the Ugandan People's Defense Force, which is the government of Uganda.
Is there a lot of tagging going on? Oh, Cholo
Like
League.
gang tagging?
Oh, I thought you said Cholo Land.
Like Cholo Land. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Were you in danger at any time?
Spray paint
Did you
is-
feel any danger?
No, there were. Honestly, I felt incredibly safe. There's been a ceasefire now for a year almost, and you know the people want peace. And Gulu Town, which was for a long time the base of operations for the Ugandan People's Defense Force, is capitalism is springing up, and everybody knows wherever capitalism succeeds, war falters. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Somebody stepped on a landmine.
I know. So yeah, no, everything's fine. I mean, there were a few instances, and some people were killed while I was there. But
Cool.
not
Not
me.
you.
Not me.
That was good. Well,
Did you get any
Wow.
ideas for your comics?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was there. I was just mentioning to someone else earlier. I've been reading about this conflict since 2001. This is
what is the conflict about? Because we don't know.
yeah. Well, it's very tribal, right? Ultimately, the Lord's Resistance Army is headed by a gentleman named Joseph Kony, who, amongst other things, claims to be possessed by the Spirit of Jesus Christ and believes he's going to, through violence, reinstate a government based on the Ten Commandments. So he's an
Kinda like Mel
extremist
Gibson.
Christian. That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, Kony walks around with a shirt that just says "Sugar Tits" on it. Everywhere. There's a famous picture of him, the Sugar Tits shirt on. Can't even do it with a straight face.
I thought it was funny.
So Kony's a piece of work, you know. He's an extremist Christian. He's more sane now that they're in peace talks, but he's been pretty crazy over the years.
So he's the instigator of most of the madness.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to get into it because this is a show called Comic Book Geeks, but when President Museveni took power 20 years ago, it began a new cycle of violence in the South, where they'd had violence, in the North, and they'd had violence in the South previously. And it has everything to do with when the British came in, where they funneled resources, tribal antagonism. You know, it's old stuff with new cloaks, and it's complex.
So the Unknown Soldier,
You
he's a World War II character. And he's going to come to
that's right.
Africa, and he wears his bandages all over his
not
head.
the
Nobody
same-
sees his face.
That's correct, but it is not the same character. It's in the same continuity. However, we have an African unknown soldier now. One of my biggest problems with all this kind of liberal African stuff that you're seeing coming out of Hollywood and stuff, Blood Diamond and all that crap, is it's always this white savior descending to help these people who live in this hell on earth, which is Africa, and that's really something we're going to try to avoid a lot. So, so it's an African unknown soldier, and he's bandaged. He's also colonized.
How would you know it? Because he's all bandaged.
His hands.
His
Does he
hands
talk?
are
He
black.
says yo-yo.
Yeah, that's right.
Yo.
That's right.
Oh, we censored that, right, Mike? Because that was a.
Well,
black
was
movie.
it?
Mike wants to say. Go on.
Yeah, that's it.
At least my
That's
jokes
weird,
were
I know.
funny. So anyway,
It's
I thought
faux
right.
shizzle. Joseph Kony, you going down, motherfucker. That's how he talks. No, his parents fled in the last few months of the Obote regime, and he was raised in the United States. So he himself is colonized. The whole thing, it's about post-colonialization, but also it's about there's a certain character you see throughout African history, this kind of alpha male who rises to power through violence you see again and again. So it's really dealing with the differences between problems systemic to colonization and problems that could be inherently African.
Well, say when you get this kind of an idea and you want to do it as a comic, can you maybe go through the process of how you get somebody to give you money for it?
Yeah. Because you want to talk about the money. And they pay me $150 a page, and each month it's 22 pages. Try to
But the thing is, a lot of your ongoing
Wow.
series are shorter than many of their miniseries.
well, hopefully that won't be the fate of this one. We'll see.
And the next question is, how long does it take you to do it? Then I'll do the math. in my head.
If I don't have any other projects rolling, which right now I'm fortunate that I have a bunch of stuff going on, but technically I'd like to try to get 2 scripts a month done on that and then work on something personal, but that's a fiction. I never ever get to operate that way. That's ideal.
That's good. I didn't think comics paid that much. And do comic book artists get about the same? They get more,
no,
don't
they deservedly so. They get more. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean
because
they
it would
put in
take
so much
longer.
more work. Yeah, I mean what takes me a week to write, it'll take an artist a month to draw. So.
Because I know you used to say Kirby could draw a page in like a day or something, so most artists must take 2 or 3 days.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
could
mean, you can't
certainly
use
write more than
Kirby
a
as the
page.
example.
Well, what I'm saying is you could write more than a page and...
Oh yeah, if I haven't written pages in a day, then I'm pretty much just fucking off.
5 times 100 is 500 times 50.
Trying to figure out his hourly wage?
750
Is that what we're
a
doing
day?
here?
You used to be a hippie.
I know, baby.
God, that's
No, I'm a
good.
rich
I'll
hippie.
buy a lot of LSD.
Yeah.
God, that's
But
great.
no razors.
That's great, John.
Apparently.
No, I'm happy.
No,
I'm
things are
happy you're
good,
doing
man.
well. I love you. I love your
kicked my
work.
roommate out. Oh, thanks, brother. That's really sweet. I like your work too. I kicked my roommate out. I got the apartment to myself down in Venice Beach. Everything's happening, dude.
That's a nice place too.
Thank you.
That's a good place.
Josh had a party, and you go down to the beach, and people are playing the bongos and everything. I mean,
It's a total stereotype. It's amazing.
But they are doing it.
It's a good stereotype.
It's a nice beach. God, it's a great place.
Yeah, it's
to
great,
live.
man. We all of Los Angeles is sewage. Spits out like right into my front yard into the ocean. So you can, in the summer, you get these really interesting ear, nose, and throat infections. It's great, man. It's cool.
Do you go to the beach much?
I do. In the summer, I swim almost every day. Yeah. It's good. It feels good. It like centers you, you know.
Is that in the
It's
sewage
polluted.
you swim? And
In the sewage, I swim in the sewage.
Cool.
I don't swim in the ocean. I swim up the sewage
Right,
duct.
well, you can get more buoyancy there.
Yeah. It's good.
I'm trying to think of a question. I'm trying to think of a question. I was back in Africa in my mind, and I was thinking about the unknown soldier. And
Well, one thing I did want to say, like, not to harp on this Africa thing, because I'm sure it's tuning people out.
Is there a website people can go to and just?
Yeah,
find
there's a
out the rest?
couple. One website that's interesting, becoming less effectual as peace is setting in, is guluwalk.com. That people can check that. That will clue you into a certain
It's
degree.
not as good now that it's become more peaceful.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, you know.
sorry, I turned it off.
I bet they missed the days of.
Can I talk? Can I talk to them?
Yeah,
Who is it?
yeah, give it to-
Let's
give it to
me.
Josh.
I bet it doesn't work inside.
Let's see.
Probably my kids.
It's Verizon calling, I think. Hello? Hello?
I bet you won't hear
Hello?
anybody.
My name's Jeffrey Patterson. I've collected comics for 50 years. Had a store for 25 years. I got married on TV. We've got our own comic book. I dress up as a superhero constantly. I really try to show my love for comics, and we've got some stuff we want to show you. The shows, you know, we've got the TV show, and we've got the comic book, and we want to show you some of the stuff we do. It shows our love of comic books.
I'm Jeffrey Patterson, the comic book king of Gardena, Wizards fanboy, and this is my house. It's like a comic book museum. Let me take you through and show you what it looks like.
While it might not be Buckingham Palace, Jeffrey Patterson has created his own comic book castle. In the bedroom, the kitchen, indoors and outdoors, Patterson proudly displays his favorite characters.
I think that's one of the things I like. Everybody likes it.
Patterson views comics as an art form. So just like everyone else who hangs a favorite print or painting, Jeffrey shows off the work of comic book artists Reed Crandall and Frank Frazetta. Still not convinced Patterson may be the country's biggest comic book fan? Well, there's one other thing worth mentioning.
My unique personal item? I don't know. Okay, it's probably this is what you're talking about. This is my Captain Marvel tattoo.
Patterson's passion for this art form became his business when he opened Jeffrey's Comics. The store gave him the opportunity to meet fellow fans and his future wife, Monica.
These are images that they say things about heroism and fun and the bright colors they have and innocence and a lot of things that people are happy about and happy to see, a house that's a little bit different from every house on the block.
That's why they call me a geek. Oh, well, a comic book geek.
We're back. We're back from Africa. We're back here with Josh Dysart. Josh.
And another thing that you've done recently would be Conan the Barbarian.
It's true. Do you know what is interesting, though? It is interesting how you say back from Africa. We never say, like, we're back from North America or we're back from Europe.
Well, because we went to Africa.
Well, we went to Uganda.
Oh.
I just want, that's just like, it's this interesting thing. Like people,
I think
you'll even talk to travelers and they'll be like, oh, I went to Tokyo, I went to Paris, I went to Africa. It's just this really interesting thing. Like
I think it
how
all
we
boils
lump
down
it-
to that USA for Africa video, because that's just sort of like, you know,
Yeah.
where it all comes from.
What?
It's so much more of a problem than a.
Now this isn't a comic
Similar
book question
solution.
exactly, but what affected you the most, say, when you're down there? Because it is a different culture, very, you know, vastly different from
Absolutely,
our own.
completely. I mean, well, you know, you mean in the sense of being in a post-conflict zone, or do you mean culturally?
I don't
Like,
know. Did you see a murder down there?
I did not see a murder.
Did you? Okay,
Did you
let me
get laid?
think.
I had an opportunity, but Central Africa is not the best place to get laid. I mean, you know.
Tell us about how
Are
the
you
opportunity
prejudiced?
come
What's
about.
wrong?
That's
I mean, well,
interesting.
first of
Are
all,
you prejudiced? What's wrong with that?
No, first of all, because
Had
of
to
racial
swat the
ignorance.
flies off of it?
because of the gender. Oh Jesus, like Matunda juice. It's because of the gender politics.
Yes.
They're different
So
there.
it was
They're not like
the wrong
Occidental.
gender was
Yeah, it was the wrong gender.
gender?
It was. There's a
So
third
it was
gender
a woman
there.
then, right?
No, the gender politics mean that for me to get laid, if that were in fact my goal, in Uganda,
Wait
it
a
would
second.
probably be with a prostitute.
Okay.
And you know, a lot of them are refugees from the DRC conflicts, and it's just not it's not the safest thing to do. However, let me say that Uganda has one of the most positive
HIV
responses to HIV. No, it's
Oh,
true.
responses.
Response is one of the most in all of all of the
one of the
continent.
most positive HIV populations.
Yeah, no, one of the most positive responses to HIV in all of the continent. They've had a relatively successful program called ABC, and which stands for abstinence. I don't know what the
Beaten
fuck it
off
stands for.
and-
Yeah, and condoms. But they forget the condoms. The best part is driving around Kampala, which is a city of like 1,300,000, you know, big, relatively modern city, and driving around and seeing these huge advertisements paid for by the United States government for abstinence and single partner sex, and no word about condoms or anything. All paid for by the United States government. It's really interesting.
Well, what was the most distinctive thing that you'd see, say, that as far as something different from what you're used to in your culture? What would that be? I mean, what
that's
really affected you?
well, a lot. I mean, a lot. I think the most interesting thing and the thing that struck me the most is not necessarily culturally specific as much as regionally specific, and that is the child soldiers is a real issue. And I want to talk about that. Like, you know, the real weapon of mass destruction in the world is not what George Bush says it is. It's the Chinese-made AK-47, which can last up to 40 years if taken care of properly. It can be passed down from generation to generation. It's flooded the continent of Africa. It's
I sent Sally Struthers
An
$85 to buy an AK-47 for a young African.
Nice, that's good. That's right. The March of Artillery.
Yeah, she's doing good work over there.
Yeah. So the child soldiers is a really interesting phenomenon, particularly when you get into Acholi land, because virtually every kid you run into has an interesting story on one side of the conflict or another, or just trying to stay out of it, which is what most Acholi are doing. I mean, this is
They
the
speak
home
English over there?
Yeah, because it was a British protectorate. Depending on their level of education, you know, I mean, there's an incredible amount of tribes fall within these sort of random borders that are now called Uganda, that the British just kind of circled with a marker and threw these tribes together. But yeah, I did write Conan the Barbarian. It was awesome. It's really cool.
And you were originally going to do it with your old friend from?
Tone Rodriguez
The
from
famous,
Violent Messiahs,
famous
which are going
Violent
to be
Messiahs.
it's going to be reprinted by IDW. I mean, I hope that deal has gone through because I just talked about it. But IDW is going to reprint Violent Messiahs for the 10th anniversary. And
Otherwise known as Hitman, I hear.
yeah, that's right. No, I don't know. I can't say.
Okay.
But yeah, anyone who's familiar with the Violent Messiahs title, I think, has seen the posters for the Hitman movie or some of the advertisements for the video game are probably pretty impressed with the similarities.
Wow.
Yeah, and we predate Hitman.
That's still my favorite work of yours. I hate to say
Thank you.
your
You didn't
first
do
work.
Hitman,
Your
that
first
was
work.
Garth
Yeah, I didn't do Hitman. Yeah.
I wasn't talking about Hitman. I was talking about Violent
By the way,
Messiahs.
yeah, for clarification, not the Garth Ennis Hitman, but the new,
video game.
The video game,
Yeah.
which is awesome. By the way, anyone who's ever played the video game.
So you are an alleged rising star because Jeffrey said his favorite work of yours was your first work.
was my first work.
Yes.
And that's what rising stars do. They fail upward.
Go ahead, you were going to say something.
Let me think. So, okay, so let's see. So have we done exhausted Conan?
No, we didn't even start.
It was a miniseries?
Yeah, it was a miniseries, Conan and the Midnight
For?
God, for Dark Horse, who is currently publishing the Conan titles. It was a lot of fun because like Conan and I could not be more different. So it was pretty cool, like to tap into my inner misogynist and war hawk.
Did it change you?
I think it did. I think that I had to find a positive angle on the alpha male, and I think that was good for me because I was raised by a single woman, and I'm not really very good at manning up. Conan helped me deal with that.
Conan is the ultimate man.
He mans up. There's no bullshit
like
about
your daddy.
that.
He has no
Like,
fear.
yeah, he's like my dad. That's right. Yeah.
Have you read the Robert E. Howard stories?
I have. When I was a kid, I read a lot of them. I can't definitively say all of them, but a lot. And then when I got the project, I went back and revisited a few of the short stories that I recall being really dope. And then also Hour of the Dragon, because my story took place a year after the events in Hour of the Dragon. But my story, to be quite honest, I'm happy with it, but it's not very Howardian, if that's a word, Howardian.
Howardian?
I believe my Conan is. I believe he acts very much like Howard's Conan, particularly as I imagine he would, because my story was about Conan's midlife crisis. So, but I don't think my story was very Howardian.
And they'll put it together,
It was more
all your
Lovecraftian.
stories together as a graphic novel.
It already is
actually
out,
have
and in fact, I
that.
did a signing at your store, and you hadn't ordered any copies.
You had to send somebody to another
You sent
comic
somebody
shop.
to Mike's store to buy them, then they came back so I could sign
So
them.
now we don't have any.
At the signing at your store. So
Man.
it is out, in fact, at stores that order
Well,
it.
my son does the order. I really am embarrassed personally about
Well,
that.
perhaps we should bring him on the show and berate
Because I like
him
Conan,
publicly.
and I love you, and we didn't support you. on
I
that.
know, I was really let
feel
down by the
bad.
whole thing.
I
Actually
feel
took a
bad.
shit in the corner in your stock room.
I didn't care.
Motherfucker! Oh! I
But he had
squeezed one
Conan
out.
bootlegs that you could sign.
Did you? Like Conan the Destroyer? Like,
Conan the cartoon series. Remember
oh
that
yeah, I
cartoon?
could sign that. Yeah, totally. That'd be
Sign it.
awesome. I'd totally
And now
get
you can
something
sell
to do.
Hellboy bootlegs because
Hellboy, dude, that's gonna be awesome. I'm doing
Talk to us about it.
BPRD 1946 comes out in January. I'm really excited. Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense 1946.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Co-wrote it with Mike Mignola, who I just think is amazing. His, gives the best notes in the business. Has made me a better writer. And
Do you guys get together and kind of?
we get together and we
Brainstorm, I guess they
wear
call it.
togas and we eat, cucumbers and.
Is he a jokester? Is he a funny guy?
Mike is a funny guy, but Mike's a funny guy in a very droll kind of way. He sort of has this crotchety, for lack of a better term, demeanor.
What
Not
is it? Oh,
crotchety,
crotchety,
but it's funny. I mean, he's funny. So it's really dope. Basically, what's happening is the war has ended 6 months after the Soviets have taken. Oh, I'm sorry, the Russians have taken the Reichstag, and the Russians have brought in a special occult team to dig up all the crap the Nazis were working on. And so America sends its own occult team to kind of get the info first. And the Russians have this incredibly complex, well-backed team. And what America has is the very, very first incarnation of the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, which anyone who follows the comic later realizes will become this huge militaristic operation in defense of the United States and human race in general. But at this point, it's an old man and his peer, a younger peer named Broom. Which is you don't really read. I can tell you don't read Hellboy, but anyway, So Hellboy is 2 years old. He was just adopted 2 years ago, and Broom is sent away from dealing with his new experiment / child, which is Hellboy, to Berlin to in this race for the occult. This occult materials. It really starts the occult Cold War, and Mike Mignola and I would like to explore that as much as possible.
Did he have the idea to do it, and then he said, "I really want to work with Josh"? Or did you have the idea and say, hey, would you like to do this? Or how did this come about?
The idea for doing a book in 1946 in Berlin was Mike's. And Mike was looking for a writer that lived in Los Angeles because he had recently moved here and he wanted to work intimately with the writer. And also sort of kind of had a penchant for doing history and stuff like that. And two people brought me to Mike Mignola's attention. One is Mike Wellman, who Mike Mignola shops at his store. which is, I'm sure
I'll tell
your store
I'll
too.
tell you how I did it. We'll do the aside.
And the other one is Scott Ali. And I had also done a book called Captain Gravity and the Power of the Vril, which took place in 1939 and 1940. About
Which I gave to Mike that
Which
day.
he gave to Mike, which I think was a huge help because it's
Yeah, that's great though.
yeah. So, and it's about a black superhero fighting mutant Nazis in 39. So he was all over that shit. So things.
Stuff.
This is on after midnight, right?
Maybe.
After midnight.
Or on YouTube whenever you click. But yeah,
so it's going to be really, really cool, and I hope, and I may be speaking out of turn, but I do hope that it is the beginning of Mike and I exploring a side of BPRD which I always feel has been inherent in the property, but has never been really brought to the surface, which is, to my mind, and I told this to Mike in our very first meeting, and I think it was the genesis for a lot of what we've been working on, is I've always felt like Hellboy was a metaphor for the Cold War. I think if you look at the way everything happens, it all starts with World War II and then it progresses throughout. And I think Mike was doing a lot of that unconsciously. And so I think what we're going to do is, what I would like to do is try to bring that to the surface. And Mike has been amazing at letting me throw in my own ideas and then also generating his ideas and us working collaboratively and making that all happen. It's really cool.
So you might do something else too.
I would say it is guaranteed that I will have for future work with Mike Mignola.
Yeah, that's slick.
And in fact, this is awesome. And in fact, the Hellboy video game coming out from Konami will have a comic book in it that Mike and I wrote, one shot that Jason Sean Alexander drew and that Dave Stewart colored. That's beautiful. That I'm really proud of.
Isn't that already out, or is the comic book out?
The comic book will only be available in the video game, and then hopefully we're going to find a place to collect it later. I have copies.
Oh, like on your computer or something?
No, I have copies, like physical.
Oh, can you hook it up?
I can hook it up.
Cool, it'd be good.
But you can't sell it in the store, though.
Well, why would I want it? No, I want one for myself.
That's
Just give me
what I'm
one.
saying.
I won't sell it. I promise.
All right.
Give Jeffrey one too. I'll buy it from him. So,
what else is going on?
Well, I think
Greendale.
You doing any rock and roll work?
I am. I'm doing a graphic novel with
Would you love
Neil
we
Young.
ask him a like just a random question? And yes,
As a matter of fact, I am doing rock and roll work.
What's going
Tell
on?
us about it. Tell us about it.
I'm doing. Can I stick my finger in your ear?
You gonna channel Christ?
Please.
You can do it.
Please.
Don't be scared. Oh my God, that's icky. Don't you have
Is it?
KFC or something? No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm doing this graphic novel called Greendale with Neil Young based on his concept album he did in 2003, and that's a really, really great experience. And it's being drawn by Sean Murphy, who is fantastic, and a great ink slinger.
How big is the graphic novel?
150 pages.
Wow, cool.
And it's going to be 36 feet by 22 feet.
Now, how
It's
did
going to beat out the Kiss comic for largest.
How did he and you come together?
Sean and I are Neil Young and I. We were brought together by Karen Berger. Neil Young had approached Vertigo about the potentiality of this project, and
Vertigo is a part of DC Comics.
That's correct. Vertigo
it's the
is
more
the-
adult.
that's right,
adult
it's the
area.
porn line. DC's porn line. No, it isn't, but it is the mature line. And so then she and John Vankin, who was my editor on Swamp Thing at the time, before Swamp Thing was handed to Pornsack, which is a real name.
Yeah, that's not a line of comics.
No, Pornsack is a real
Should be
human
the
being.
DC Porn Sack.
He's a wonderful, wonderful person, perhaps to make up for
I'd
his
like to have
name.
a Porn Sack section in my shop.
Yeah. I think it's Sacred Wish in Thai. I might have made that up, but I believe Pornsack is Sacred Wish in Thai. I think he's a prince back in Thailand. And he's slumming. He's a comic book editor.
Okay. He's an editor of
never heard
comic
of him.
books.
You never heard of Pornsack? He's great. He's editing like Crossing Midnight right now, which is a beautiful book that nobody reads. He's great. I really like working with him. So anyway, Karen Berger and John Bacon turned me on to Neil, and I did a pitch for Neil, and he greenlit it immediately. And then we paraded in front of him like this long line of artists, and he didn't greenlight anybody for the longest time. And then he through process, he eventually settled on Sean, which is a great choice because Sean is a really, really good artist. You've seen some of his work, right, Sean Murphy?
Off-road.
Yeah, Off-road, yeah.
So
Like
a lot
to
of the
see, like,
DC artists then, mainly, right? 'Cause
No,
it was
I think
DC.
that was Oni or something. But
Yeah, Off-road was Oni, yeah. This might be Sean's first DC work.
You know, it would be cool. Like, is Neil Young actually in the book? Is he a character?
Well,
in
you
the
know,
book?
there's an interesting it's kind of up to Sean, because I don't want to really step on his toes about character design, but at some point an antagonistic sort of negative energy comes into this town of Greendale, and only this young girl who's an activist in training can see it. And I would like that to look a little bit like Neil Young, that gentleman who wandered.
Bad guy?
Yeah. He's not really a bad guy, but yeah, he's antagonistic energy.
What is the basic idea you come from? Is from his record.
Is that thing just
his
going
album,
more and more now?
His album. You set it up. I don't know.
Don't push the red buttons.
Stephen King says that asking where his ideas come from, that's the worst question he gets. You know, it's like because he's like, I don't know how to answer that. You know.
You're not serious with that question. Where do ideas come from? They come from everywhere.
There's some sort of nether region, and when good ideas come, it is like you're just reaching up and tapping into something that's not yourself, and that feels great.
Yeah, there's a creative spark, and a creative spark helps drive the creative process, obviously, but there comes a point where it requires more than creativity to further.
Even if you have a really good nugget of an idea one morning when you wake up, you still have to build it into something.
What do you do with that idea?
Everybody wants to create something, and it might not always be artistic, but you know, guys that like to work on cars.
What do other people do for recreation? Like, people like spend money, they spend $80 a month on cable, or they spend a lot of money on like their bike. It's just like anything else. It's just my form of recreation happens to like also translate into like an artistic endeavor.
I like to compare comics to heroin, with heroin being probably the more accepted habit.
So awesome, so good, not just good, funny.
It's very infectious. It gets into your blood, and it won't let go.
Comic strips, comic books, graphic novels, it's all comics.
It's tough to get some people over that hurdle of a comic book? You want me to read a comic book?
Most comics were historically crap, primarily geared to morons and GIs and kids.
The low-grade inherent aspect of comics is an important part of the engine that makes them run.
We really have no idea what we're doing. Absolutely no clue.
This is a great way to get my propaganda out there.
You have to have a field of endeavor that you're the total king and master of, and you can't worry about other people's interpretations of your world.
I'm an artist. Look, it's art.
That's why they call me a geek.
No, let it roll.
I like it. It's good for segues.
But the basic idea comes from his album.
Yeah,
what was that idea before you enlarged it, I guess?
The album is really just a series of portraits concerning these people in this fictional Northern California town of Greendale. And then the graphic novel is going to be the story of one of those characters, Sun Green. And so it's the story of a girl sort of becoming a woman on the eve of the Iraq War in 2003. And not only that, but discovering that she's from a line of American witches, a female strain of, it's along the female line.
Is that something you created, or is that in the album?
It is not in the album, however, it is in, there's hints at it in some other Neil's writings about the album.
I think you did like a stage play, and I think
there's a film.
Tupperware line.
That's right, there's a film, there's a Tupperware line, there's the Greendale dildo line, there's a movie, there's a book, an art book, and there's the CD. And so the art book is where I took some of that other stuff, and I just sort of tried to turn it into something. And then Neil had his own notes as well.
These are all people in the town, right? But the town is of like a certain point in time or a certain place, right? I mean, it's an exploration of our
2003, March 7. It starts March 17th, 2003. The 2 days before we invade Iraq, the morning that George Bush said that the brothers Hussein and Father Hussein have to have 48 hours to split the country. So it's literally 48 hours before shock and awe begins. And it takes place in Northern California in the Redwood Empire. But the town itself is fictional.
Cool. And he's from up there, right?
No, he's actually Canadian, but he does live in Northern California.
Yeah,
now.
it's like when he wrote the album, he lived.
Yeah,
up there,
yeah,
so
totally.
He's like kind of writing what he knows. And,
yeah, exactly.
And that sort of thing.
That's exactly what the deal is, the situation.
Cool. And what else? So that's pretty impressive. And you did Avril Lavigne.
Yeah. Yeah, I did an Avril Lavigne graphic novel, which, get this, I just found out is going to be packaged on the Zoom. Like, you know, we did digital downloads for Asia and stuff. And now, like, you can buy a certain, you know, the Zoom is like the Microsoft's attempt to compete with the iPod. So apparently my digital downloads that I wrote are going to be packaged on the Zoom, for which I get absolutely no extra income for because I was completely ripped on that deal.
Well, I think you were paid pretty well up.
I was paid very well up front. They paid for Africa. They bought me a new computer. They paid for a trip home for me.
Wow.
What do you think about the writer's strike?
I think the writers are completely within their rights to strike, and I think it's an extremely important time to stand their ground. I think the technology is changing so rapidly that it is not shocking to imagine that in 3 to 5 years your TV and your computer is going to be the same device. And if all television shows are downloadable and everything else, and writers are seeing absolutely none of that income, I mean, it's almost as if now is the last moment for this battle. If you let it go any further than this, the tech will have
Well, did you always want to be a writer? And did you see yourself as a novelist? Or did you see yourself as a comic book writer?
No, I never saw myself as a comic book writer. I sort of tripped and fell into it, but I love it. I don't mean to say that it was like but no, I mean, yeah, I always saw myself as a writer. To be quite honest, I got into writing because film was my first love, and I, as a young child, did not have the tools to create cinema, so I wrote because pen and paper is the absolute cheapest creative tool you can get. So, and comics became a natural for me. Comics became a natural for me because I was, unlike the great novelists, I was writing visuals only because I was trying to create cinema on paper, which is something I'm trying to get out of the habit of now, but it was great training for comics because I feel very confident in my visualization skills.
What comics did you read when you were young?
The very first comics I recall stumbling onto was with my mother's Playboys, and they were the first, they were reprints of the first R. Crumb stuff. So R. Crumb was the first one that I kind of stumbled onto, and then I was kind of away from comics for a while. And then I stumbled on a lot of the early Alan Moore work, particularly Watchmen. And
that was your first stuff?
That was around that time, 84. I was 13, so I had a long break. I wasn't like a lot of... This is why a lot of these guys are so into the superheroes. And I like the superheroes, but they didn't characterize my youth like they did people, really amazing writers like Mark Waid, and you know, these guys like Jeff Johns. These guys deeply influenced, and I was just into other stuff. You know, I was playing role-playing games.
When I started reading comics, I was a kid. There was a lot of cowboy comics.
That's right.
And I liked the comics that weren't superheroes. That were like I could imagine myself as being like a Private Eye. Or a
I'm just gazing in your eyes,
or a cowboy, or something
like this,
or Tarzan. You know, something that was real.
Absolutely.
But
yeah, Tarzan
I don't think I ever imagined myself as the Hulk or
Captain Greedy,
or as a superhero until I, of course, became.
Right. Yes. I mean, I kind of fell into being a superhero.
You know, I'm totally into this whole superheroes as modern mythology and everything. I mean, I dig that jazz, and when it's written well, I'm totally into it. I think that, but I agree with you. I wish that the diversity was I wish we had more diversity, and I wish that the readership was there for
They
comics
had like
outside of superheroes.
50 or 60 romance comics coming out.
I love that stuff. I love that
And women
stuff.
were actually reading comics.
Yeah,
then.
that's right.
Or girls.
Well, those
actually.
romance comics are so interesting, and they go through interesting transition periods too. You know, they start off kind of really shallow and romantic. I mean, but they get pretty interesting as you get into the 60s and stuff. And then, I mean, I think that's why the R. Crumb stuff is like the foundation for a lot of my work. All those late 60s comics are so interesting in the way they start to deconstruct our perception of comic book imagery and everything. And I mean, that's the first stuff that hit me. And then later on, you know, I mean, as a youngster, you know, that big moment, the Watchmen, Dark Knight, I'm confessed to being a child of that whole thing.
How do you feel about the state of the industry now?
I think it's good. I think, you know, this cross-pollination of various media is a double-edged sword, and I think it's done a lot of good for us. But I do love the medium as a formalist, and I do think that we have a lot of people coming into the medium now specifically as a channel to get into movies and film, and ultimately I think that's to the detriment of the medium itself. I like people to create comics to imagine a comic book while they're creating a comic book. I'm not opposed to having things be converted from medium to medium, but it just seems like more and more you open comics, and even some really big names who are good writers, they seem to be writing for another medium. I mean, there's a lot of comics out there that read like TV shows, that read like movies, and they're not using the medium to its fullest potential.
Like the entire Platinum Studios line, just to name names.
Yeah, I don't know who that is. So.
I got a concept. Let's make a shitty.
Oh
book.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, that's frustrating because I have been struggling since we published Violent Messiahs. I've been struggling for a decade now to learn exactly what it is that makes a good comic book, and what exactly is my medium about, and like what are our strengths that are inherent to what we do. And I respect our medium tremendously in this age of like hyper-information. In this age of hyper-information and like every flat screen being covered with digital motion and sound and smoke and all this bullshit, we're practically a cave painting. You know, we have no motion, we have no sound, we use the lowest tech possible to tell our story, and I think that's really admirable, particularly in this kind of, like, as we're in a wash of media saturation and everything. I mean, I really dig it, and while I like that we influence other media, I don't like that it's like we're the substrate for all pop culture, and none of that money trickles back down, you know what I mean? Like, it's all, we are so much more imaginative than film. We're so much more imaginative than, the only thing that even touches us for imagination is fucking advertising, for God's sakes. And so we're the ones, we're the imagination of America, and you know, we don't really get the benefit
but
of
we have more prestige than we've had in the past.
Yes, we do. That's
but
the other side of the sword.
People don't really see us as real high art or anything.
No, I mean,
they never have.
how they can look at you and think,
it's not
you know
as
why?
low as it was.
That is not high art.
As
I don't
it was
know.
seen. I mean, people like Reed Crandall, my favorite artist. I mean, he struggled his whole life. Ended up being a night watchman and an alcoholic, you know, and probably made no money. And you see people like...
Well, his whole generation, I mean, absolutely. All they did was produce work and never really get anything gained from that. And that work...
And no toys, no...
yeah, that's right.
You know, they can't sell the original art. They gave it away. They burned it. You know?
But it doesn't change the fact that
nobody would care about it, you know, in the future.
And it doesn't change the fact that they deeply affected, though, the conversation of pop culture. I mean, if we look at all art... instead of individual pieces, if we look at it as a conversation that's happening that the species is having with itself, for entertainment purposes or escapism, which I personally don't believe that there's such a thing as escapism, but for whatever reason you want to say, the fact of the matter is that whether whether their imagery was successful at the time or not, over the years that becomes the mainstream imagery, and they're responsible for that. It like emerged from them. Yeah. They were fundamentally important to that conversation, and it just doesn't, the economics doesn't flow back. You know, we give and we don't receive as much in return. But you're right, our prestige is going up.
Your wife says that a lot, but go ahead.
That she gives and you don't return?
Yeah.
I believe that's true. And that, but I do think that, but it's, I mean, you know, we're getting more prestige, but with it comes, a perversion of our medium's potential, unfortunately. Like, a lot of people don't see us for our true potential. It's like we got breast implants on or something.
Well, at least we're getting
more,
like we're getting more interest, and that's really
absolutely.
important. I think it's really hard, I guess, for people to get beyond the fact that it was aimed at a pretty young audience. I mean, comics in the 40s and 50s and 60s, I mean, they're really dramatic, dynamic, and if you love comics, you could really feel for them. But mostly they were directed at about probably 10-year-olds, and now they've got something that's really interesting. They do continued story. They do a lot of stuff that I think TV copied. We did a lot, almost all that stuff before they did,
That's
and really well. And people still don't quite realize it. But if people would kind of get beyond that prejudice and go into comic stores, and especially Jeffrey's Comics right across from El Camino College is a great comic store.
Don't go looking for the Conan trade paperback.
I think they'd see something that and that would impress them.
No, absolutely.
That they'd have fun with.
I think that if you can walk into a comic book store and you can get past all the superhero imagery, which I don't mean to knock superheroes, because I do think they're really interesting, and there are some cats like Grant Morrison and I think Mark Waid who do amazing work with the superheroes.
Right.
But if you can get past all that Peter Pan syndrome imagery, and you can get past some of the misogynistic imagery, and you can go to the back, I think you're right. A well-stocked comic book store will have something for any individual who walks through that door, if they're open-minded enough and they can pry their head open and get it in there. I totally believe that's true.
Take a moment to talk about a real American hero. A couple months ago, Evel Knievel sued Kanye West for using his likeness in a music video. And when Kanye's mother died last week, Evel Knievel pulled the lawsuit, said that, you know what, Mr. West has enough to think about, enough to worry about, doesn't need to worry about my lawsuit. Today, Evel Knievel died. He died a brave man, an honest man, and a noble man. And we here at Comic Book Geeks salute him, a real American hero.
We went and checked out a library that any guy would be proud to have in his home. Check it out. From the car in the driveway to the walls to the windows, it's all about one of the classic genres of literature, comics. Jeffrey Patterson is a Southern California comic dealer, but he doesn't just deal comics, he lives them. Name a superhero, he'll have the books, the collectibles, the action figures, even full-size costumes. This guy doesn't do anything halfway. It's all the way, baby. From floor to ceiling, cabinets to doors, every inch of his home is dedicated to high art. And when visitors get tired of worshiping at the altar of the superhero, they can lie down for a rest. That's a real skeleton, by the way. Classic and creepy.
That's why they call me a geek.
Everybody follows that.
I think maybe it makes really good writers when they have to do something every month. It's not like you can have writer's block and you're doing a regular series and you just really produce all the time. And you've got to get better. I mean, it's practice. You just have to get better at something like this.
Absolutely. I think the thing that I love most about what I do is I have unwittingly stumbled into being part of a group of people who are really the last bastion of those pulp writers. And that's exactly what those pulp writers like Howard did. And they produce so much work. And they and it was considered disposable literature, and it was put out in these magazines, and they produced work after work after work, and they paid their rent. And there's only one group of human beings still creating art like that in this country, and it's comic book artists and comic book writers and comic book colors.
Because when I was a kid in the 50s, we have to go back to that again and again.
Yeah, let's talk
but
about
they would do like 3 stories, and they'd be 7 or 8 pages. And
man, those
when I look at those
produced,
stories
it's
now, I think, I
unbelievable.
wonder what they could have done if they could have had 15 or 20 pages. Now, a comic book now, I mean, it may go on 5 or 6 issues. They may do it in 100 pages. And I just got this TV show Dexter. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
It's like a serial, but they did it just like a comic book. You know, they'd have little subplots here. They'd have one plot that would go on and on and on, and then they would finally finalize that and everything. And it's so much fun to watch. And it's the same thing with comic books.
Look at Heroes.
They can really do a lot because they have a lot of space now that they didn't have when they got their early reputation.
I think a lot of the space nowadays is wasted, though. I just read the Moon Knight Annual, written by one of the writers of Entourage, and it was a piece of crap.
Sure, man. He writes a teleplay. I mean, essentially what he has to write is a way to find an affordable means of having cats sit around and talking and saying clever shit. And that's not comics. I mean, that's not comics. Like, we have to come up. There
was actually 3 women sitting around talking about this guy that raped. Did you read it?
No.
Oh, you just figured because he's a TV
I
writer.
just assume, yeah.
I think TV writers should stay out on the streets with their signs and stay out of comics.
Well, I mean, look, some cats.
Take that, Brian Vaughn. Go ahead.
Brian is going to make an awesome television writer.
Yes,
he really is. He really is.
Oh, that's right. We're on YouTube now. Shit.
I'm not saying that just because of that. He's going to make an awesome TV writer. But
look
you're
at
right.
the guy. Look at the guy that
talking.
did Ultimate Hulk Wolverine. I can't even remember his name, but he does that show Lost. Comes in and does 2 issues, right? And has like a huge readership. I thought they were terrible to begin with. I'm embarrassed when people ask for number 3, but it's been over a year and number 3's not out.
Wolverine was the title. I don't think you mentioned the title.
It was Ultimate Hulk Wolverine.
Yeah,
and
okay.
yeah, I mean, he rips Wolverine in 2 and throws him on 2 sides of a mountain. And the next, issue and a half is Wolverine climbing up a mountain to get his legs and remembering how he got into the situation. And I thought it was terribly written, embarrassingly bad, and why anybody'd even want to care about number 3, it baffles me. And that guy should just not, they shouldn't let him in.
Do you know what is so interesting about the decompression movement in comics, which for those of you, for the audience who don't know, like, this is what Mike is talking about. There's a sort of an aesthetic debate happening in our medium about whether we should compress storytelling or decompress storytelling. And what's so interesting about that is you take a comic book like that, which I did not read, but we'll just, based on your recommendation, we'll say is entirely unsuccessful.
I happen to like it, but
okay.
I didn't want to say anything because I feel shallow liking it.
I don't think you should ever feel shallow.
Already.
So let's just take.
I said I was superficial. Why?
Take comic.
I never said you were superficial.
The comic book was superficial.
Which comic was superficial?
You didn't say that I was superficial.
No, not you. I would never say that.
I think you think I am now because that's.
I don't think that any man with a $sign on his chest could be ever considered superficial in any way. But what's interesting about decompression is that you get cats like, any of you guys reading Shaolin Cowboy, the Jeff Darrow? Okay. Incredibly decompressed comic. I mean, we're on issue 5. I think it's still the same fight scene that started the series, right?
And it's been coming out for 3 years.
Yeah, and it's been coming out for 3 years.
It's fun to look at.
But that's exactly right. Like, but Jeff Darrow, like, understands what a comic book is supposed to be, and he actuates a genuine comic book. And you read it, his use of space and imagery is so exhilarating and so refreshing that decompression is completely valid in his case. But then you get these cats who, I mean, I don't really know what they're doing. They're not servicing their artists. They're not decompressing so their artists can draw cooler shit. Ergo the reader can look at beautiful stuff. They're not. I don't know what their decompression means or what it stands for.
Right, and Grant Morrison can tell a great. And I hate to give Grant Morrison compliments because I think he's a little goofy, but.
Cat is awesome.
Yeah,
but
those great
awesome.
All-Star Superman, and they're all self-contained and
dude,
I guess
he's
that
insane.
would be compressed. Yeah.
Dude, he's insane. Well, he was doing that. He like briefly went through that phase where he was doing the 3-issue miniseries for Vertigo, right? He was doing Venomarama, We 3, which is like fundamental reading for I mean, I talk about playing with form and function and understanding your medium. We 3 is it, you know.
Did Frank quietly draw that?
Yeah. Another cat who's just recklessly cool. And then what was the third one? Oh, and Sea Guy. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So he was doing these, and in these 3 issues, he was handling 3 acts essentially, like a film, but 22 pages. He was compressing like a motherfucker, and it was so engaging and so fresh. And his voice over the years has never wavered from being unique, even when he even if you think his work fails, I mean, sometimes his work does fail, but it fails so ambitiously. That's a comic book writer. That cat is a comic book writer. He understands his medium and he's rolling with it. Oh, one of my very first great comics that I ever read that really blew my mind was Grant Morrison's.
The Filth?
No, that was recently. I know who can help me with this. No.
Animal Man.
It was Animal Man, but it's the one issue.
Animal Man was
one issue in it. But, yeah. What's it called? I don't remember the title. The Coyote.
Where he meets him?
Coyote. Damn it! I know. Yes, Coyote Gospels Coyote Gospels is a great comic book. And how old was Grant when he wrote that? He's like 24 years old or something. 28 years old. Ridiculous. Very cool.
What about that Frank Miller Batman? Since we're doing Siskel and Ebert here, what do you guys think of that?
I don't know. I think. I don't know, man. I don't want to say too much about it.
Okay,
yeah, I mean, it's not really my thing.
He does it differently, and they kind of give him carte blanche, I guess, to do it.
Which is cool.
I'm the goddamn Batman. It's just, and then he's trying to make it with Catwoman or Black Canary or anything, but it's an entirely different character from Batman. I don't mind him making it a little darker, but he's strange, is what he is, and he picks up Robin for the first time, and he takes him for a joyride or something, but it's like. It's just bizarre. It's almost like child molesting. He's strange. He thinks he can do. Okay, Frank Miller thinks he can do anything, and pretty much he can these days. I mean, he's doing this, but I mean, it's.
That's why you don't pay somebody.
It's just strange to think to say I can just do it. But nobody likes it. I will say that. I think nobody. It still sells because it's Frank Miller and it's Batman, but
it's also Jim
the people
Lee.
who liked his stuff in The Dark Knight just really looked down on this.
I think the thing is, he's taking it to its natural conclusion. That, I mean, obviously, if we're really being honest about this, Batman is going to be a crazy conservative freak. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we can't really take too seriously this notion of I saw my parents get killed in front of me, ergo I will dress up like a bat and fight crime. I mean, it doesn't really. There's a logic break somewhere, and I think
we can't take that seriously. You son of
you
a bitch.
probably can.
We take it seriously, you bastard. There's no reason not to.
So I think Frank
It's a
Miller is
great story, great
exploiting
idea.
that logic
Excuse
break.
me. If you could do any comic book, and
man, I don't like this question.
Oh, gee, I see this on
Well, you can ask
interviews all the time.
I know. I always
I'm
get
not
this
really
question.
that interested in it
He wants
either.
he wants to do a comic about the plight of the seahorses in Darfur.
The seahorses. That big ocean in Darfur. I don't know, man. Let's do a bio comic about Chief Black Kettle, the great pacifist chief of the Southern Cheyenne. Wouldn't that be interesting?
That should really sell. Yeah,
yeah, that'll sell. Exactly. I think that I don't like that question because I've really come to enjoy working with certain people. So I think that it's easier for me to say, well, yeah, I'd like to do something with Pornsack or with John Venkin or with Scott Alley or with an artist. I mean, there's a lot of artists I'd like to work with, and there's a lot of artists I've worked with in the past I'd like to work with again, like Dean Armstrong. So it's easier for me to say that. I mean, whatever Dean wants to do, all right.
What did he draw?
He did an issue of my Swamp Thing, one of my very favorite scripts, and also subsequently one of my very favorite issues.
You worked with Timothy Green, too.
I did.
Really good.
I'd love to work with Tim again. Tim and I were supposed to do, years ago, a Buckaroo Banzai comic book that Jan and Bill were going to make, and that's when I first met Tim.
Oh, wow. Does he live in L.A.?
No. Oh. But I believe he did at the time.
You're probably at too high a level right now to maybe do like a Mac Afro with Mike Wellman.
I like Mac Afro a lot, actually. I might consider, if we had a decent artist, as opposed to the first issue. Rafael Navarro did one.
Yeah, he did.
And Ralph's got chops, without a doubt.
Yeah. It's not worth the trouble. We could do other things. Maybe we'll do a Kids of Whitney High comic or a Hank Williams book.
Hank Williams Sr. Come on now. A graphic novel about the life of Hank Williams Sr.
Cool.
The real deal, man.
We're going to wind up. And we want to thank Josh. He's probably been on a show. He's a good friend of ours.
He's been our most frequent
more
guest,
often than anybody else.
Yeah, it's always fun.
This is the only thing he could do that's more dangerous than going to Africa, was coming on this show. And
even though
now that we're on YouTube and we dug up lots of dirt and
do you remember? Do you know? I know we're totally going to wrap up. I swear to God. Do you remember the time that the infamous question that led to the whole episode, buying the hooker. Do you remember the hooker episode?
I remember the hooker
So
episode.
funny.
I have another story about you now that involves
hookers.
Yeah, a tranny and.
No, we're not gonna. That's not.
Well, that's
not
cut.
good. That's that's not for public consumption. That was a story told to you in the
jest of a story.
jest of friendship, and all you have done is scream it from the rooftops.
Okay, well let's end this interview now, and then we can do the story because I would like to hear it myself.
All right, Captain Greedy.
Because we are all still
really
crazy about
happen.
comics,
brother.
Crazy about comics.
We are crazy about comics, and you should be too.
Nice ending. I like
Yeah.
how you did that.
Yay! Sorry, you guys
It
sat
saves
through
a little
that.
bit anyway.
Are we rolling?
Okay, we're back.
I know that in the past, you've gotten pretty irate at people, various stereotypical presentations of comic book readers and collectors and stuff.
Yes.
And
Like
film
when
and
the way
TV.
Hollywood portrays.
Precisely, yeah.
Yes.
You don't feel like you're contributing to this in any way with this show.
I think we are raising the bar. I mean, would be one way of putting it. Do you think that you feel like you contribute to?
Well, I mean, he obviously is all class, and that's a whole other.
Yes.
But you, on the other hand, I think maybe you're contributing to stereotypes.
Mike's got a lot of class, but it's all low.
That's good. Maybe it's all a matter of perspective. But yeah, wow, you put me on the spot. Yeah, I don't know.
I just thought
Maybe
we'd start with a bang.
It's something to think about, and it's something I will toss and turn and consider every night. And no, I'm not contributing because I actually sleep with a woman at night, and that is what angers me.
But not on the show.
But not on the show. No, on the show I sleep with Captain Greedy. And say we are crazy about comic books.
Comic book geek. I never set limits on what man can achieve, so they call me a comic book geek. I love love and beauty and what philosophers say, but I'm a comic book geek. Don't call me a loser, 'cause I'm a comic book geek. 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 I wanna live in a world of adventure. I wanna have the seas of immortality. I want to move across the limits of imagine past the limits to believe that we can be beyond the limits of human. That's why they call me a geek. Oh, well, a comic book geek. I love a comic book geek. Well, I'm a comic book.
For a year almost, and you know, the people want peace in Gulu Town, which was for a long time the base of operations for the Ugandan People's Defense Force. As capitalism is springing up, and everybody knows wherever capitalism succeeds, war falters. So,
Well,
yeah.
Somebody stepped on a landmine.
I know. So yeah, no, everything's fine. I mean, there were a few instances, and some people were killed while I was there. But
Cool.
not me.
You.
Not me.
That was good. Well,
did you get any ideas for your comics?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was there. I was just mentioning to someone else earlier. I've been reading about this conflict since 2001.
What is the conflict about? Because we don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's very tribal, right? Ultimately, the Lord's Resistance Army is headed by a gentleman named Joseph Kony, who, amongst other things, claims to be possessed by the Spirit of Jesus Christ and believes he's going to, through violence, reinstate a government based on the Ten Commandments. So he's an extremist Christian. That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, Kony walks around with a shirt that just says "Sugar Tits" on it. Everywhere. There's a famous picture of him. There's a Sugar Tits shirt on. Can't even do it with a straight face.
I thought it was funny.
So Kony's a piece of.
But no, in my real life, I have a real. I mean, she was a girlfriend, now a wife.
And pregnant as well. Like,
well, yeah.
And one assumes it's yours.
Yeah,
oh my God.
That's the segue. You went to Africa because you were doing it. You were doing the Unknown Soldier, a DC comic book.
Yeah.
And they sent you there, or you sent yourself there. You
Yeah, they
actually
didn't
paid your own
really
way.
care if I did the research
you did,
or not. They could
did
care
you-
less.
So tell us how long were you there, and tell us the whole story.
Yeah. You all right?
Wait, one second.
Is your cape like
Like
messing up my?
I made my cape not move while I did
Okay,
that.
my cape not move. I was in Africa for a little over a month, and yeah, it was awesome. I landed in Kampala, which is on the western side of Uganda, and then I followed the DRC border up to the Sudan border, which is Acholi land, which is where a 20-year-long war has been waged between the Lord's Resistance Army and the Ugandan People's Defense Force, which is the government of Uganda.
Is there a lot of tagging going on? Oh, Cholo
Like
Lee.
gang tagging?
Oh, I thought you said Cholo Land.
My Cholo land. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Were you in danger at any time?
Spray paint
Did you
is-
feel any danger?
No, there were. Honestly, I felt incredibly safe. There's been a ceasefire now for.
It was just amazing. I felt like I did. Mike does these small penis jokes, right? I felt like a woman, and I said it was like, this is what a dick is, I guess. You know, what is this I got down there? But I didn't want to tell that. That would have been pretty funny. But this is a comic book story, you know. This is a comic book show. Edit all that shit with me and my porn career. But
What was that? I missed it.
maybe we should do it. Oh,
That's the
let
stuff
me
that
see.
people want to hear, dude. They don't want to hear about comic books.
They want to hear about
What do they want to hear about comics?
John Holmes and his 12-inch penis.
Justin, can you say words like bullshit and stuff like that, or
How about now? Okay, we're in 5, 4.
Can't get the top down.
Whoa, look who's back. And look who's smiling. You're back on Comic Book Geeks, but you're not going to be smiling for much longer because we're about to break your hearts. Joshua Dysart here. He's going to tell you all about Africa. And a lot of hungry people in Africa, a lot of bad shit going down. But this is sort of like the unknown war, and he's doing a book called The Unknown Soldier. We'll talk about that later. But right now, let's just take one more moment to revel in our happiness. And